went to the Dominican Republic. It's the only place they could get a visa.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so we're going to do something a little different. It's still mostly Talmud, but it's going to be some exploration of Hanukkah. So I put together a bunch of different texts. As often happens in this class, my ideas are not fully formed. It's sort of the half-baked. So you get a preview of some things that have been going through my head that I'm just trying to kind of figure out and put together. But just a quick introduction. Hanukkah is a confusing holiday, like a lot of Jewish holidays, but in particular because it's a mashup of different stories. There's the two big stories for Hanukkah are, I mean, you know them. There's the military victory of the Maccabees over the wicked Antiochus, and then there's the miracle of the lights, where the one pot of oil lasted 8 days miraculously. So the thing about those two stories is that, first of all, they don't appear anywhere as one story in an ancient text. So it's not as if for instance, I'll show you this in a second, but the book of Maccabees, which really directly tells the story of the military victory, doesn't include a miracle over oil. And there are some early stories of a miracle over oil, but not related to the book of the Maccabees. The stories are independent of each other in the sense that you can imagine them happening without the other. You don't actually need the military victory for the miracle story to still have some power. And you certainly don't need that little pot of oil to have the miracle victory be impressive. The military victory is impressive no matter what. It was a small group that defeated a big empire. And we don't need a supernatural miracle to celebrate Yom Ha'atzmaut, for example. Yom Ha'atzmaut in and of itself is powerful enough. So you have both stories, and the stories themselves are independent of each other, and yet they're mashed together. So there's a confusion about what exactly Hanukkah is, what it's supposed to celebrate. So I'm going to start with the Talmud. And as you know, the Talmud often asks rhetorical questions, so I'm going to suggest this first question that the Talmud asks here is not a rhetorical question, it's an actual query, just wondering about Hanukkah. So it starts, what is Hanukkah? The Hebrew is my Chanukah. What is Hanukkah? So again, I'm suggesting they're trying to figure out, what is this all about? We've heard different stories. By the time you've got the Talmud, let's say the year 450 or 500, it's a good 600, 700 years after the military victory, after those events. And so what I'm imagining is a bunch of different stories about that event and other events and lights and December holidays. And now they're just deciding we're going to figure out what is this holiday. And really, they're going to make a choice. What does it celebrate? What will we see as important? For our rabbis taught, on the 25th of Kislev commence the days of Hanukkah, which are 8, on which a lamentation for the dead and fasting are forbidden. For when the Greeks entered the temple, they defiled all the oils therein, and when the Hasmonean dynasty prevailed against and defeated them, okay, so there you've got the military victory. They're kind of pushing it in there, but you can see it's far from central in their narrative. They're actually kind of getting it out of the way. So Hanukkah is, well, yeah, there were the Greeks and they defiled the temple, but the important thing is they made search and found only one cruse of oil when they were rededicating the temple, which lay with the seal of the high priest, but which contained sufficient for 1 day's lighting only. Yet a miracle was wrought therein, and they lit the lamp therewith for 8 days. All right, so that's the Hebrew school Hanukkah story we're familiar with, that little pot of oil in the aftermath of the war. You notice the Talmud spends no time discussing the war. There's no mention of Judah Maccabee here. There's no mention, really, and there's a slight mention of, there was the war and they won. Big deal, but the big deal here is the lights, okay? The following year, these days were appointed a festival with the recital of Hallel and Thanksgiving, commemorating the miracle of the lights. So my sense is that Talmud here makes a decision. Out of all the different stories, all the different themes, everything that they could have, the Jewish people could have highlighted, they decide to focus on the miracle of the lights. So what I'm going to show now is that there were other choices. Because there's these mishmash of stories, there's other issues, other themes that the rabbis in the Talmud could have lifted up, could have highlighted, and chose not to. And the main thing is that the story of Hanukkah in the book of Maccabees is a story of religious fanatics overcoming a wicked imperial empire. So that could have been the theme. In fact, you'll see very quickly that the Maccabees were religious fanatics, and we're proud of the fact that they were religious fanatics. They used that religious fanaticism to fuel the fire of their victory. And Hanukkah could easily be a celebration of religious fanaticism, and it turns out that it's not. And that's interesting to me. Okay, so I'm going to keep reading now. This is from the book of Maccabees. Already it's interesting that the book of Maccabees is not in the Torah.
Right.
So it's not in the Hebrew Bible. It's in the Christian Bible, some Christian Bibles, but it's not in the Hebrew Bible. It's not in the Torah. And that's already interesting because the book of the Maccabees is that military victory. It's not in any way a sacred text for Judaism. The Talmud certainly is. And the book of Maccabees isn't. And the rabbis of the Talmud were probably aware of it. And it came around the time where they actually could have included it in the Torah. So we have a choice not to include it. So let's keep that in mind also. Well, when I say I'm saying Torah is broadly Jewish. Yeah, because Torah also means that too. So actually, Torah is the corpus of sacred literature. And it's not included in that. Yeah.
Quick question. Yesterday I went to class here and there was some theory that the Maccabees and then the rabbis in Babel, there was some political schism between them.
Yeah.
They didn't like them.
Right.
Based on some. So you know anything about that?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm not going to go into that today. It's too much to go into. I'm really going to go into sort of the decision, which is a cultural decision that cultures make to push one theme over another, to glorify one element of the story and not something else. So look.
Did the people who are writing the Talmud have access to the Maccabees?
Seems like they did, yeah. I mean, they quote them, yeah. So that's a good question because we don't know exactly how, in what shape the book was in, but yeah, they seem to have. They had access to other sort of extra biblical books too, that could have been included in the canon and weren't. Anyway, so here's something from a very telling passage from the book of Maccabees, and this is a lot of Hebrew school kids know this is a famous part of the story. Just as he finished speaking, this is Mattathias, one of the men from Modin decided to obey the king's decree and stepped out in front of everyone to offer a pagan sacrifice on the altar that stood there. So you remember the story, Antiochus HaRasha, the wicked Antiochus, outlaws Jewish practices and also insists that they worship pigs in the temple and that they make sacrifices to the pagan gods. And there's a Jew here that goes along. And the historical reality is that there were lots of Jews that went along. That there were Jews, and I was actually taught in rabbinical school that the war was as much a civil war,
Between the two sides.
yeah, as it was a rebellion. So there were Jews that wanted to go along with the Greeks, that saw benefits to go along with the Greeks. So Mattathias sees that. When Mattathias saw him, he became angry enough to do what had to be done. Shaking with rage, he ran forward and killed the man right there on the altar. That's a Jew, so he's killing Jews.
What tribe is he from?
That's a good question. Not sure. Somebody else knows. I don't know. He also killed the royal official who was forcing the people to sacrifice, and he tore down the altar. In this way, Mattathias showed his deep devotion to the law, just as Pinchas had done when he killed Zimri, son of Salu. I'm reading now this is from the book of Maccabees. Then Mattathias went through town shouting, "Everyone who is faithful to God's covenant and obeys his law, follow me." With this, he and his sons fled to the mountains, leaving behind all they owed. All right, a lot going on here. First of all, so Mattathias actually institutes a massacre there. It's religious fanaticism. It's a religious fanatically fueled massacre. The text here invokes two passages from the Torah, other examples of religious fanaticism. One is directly Pinchas.
Right.
So we're gonna have Pinchas there in a second, but most of you recognize the Pinchas story. I feel a special affinity to Pinchas because it's my Hebrew name, and Pinchas is one of the great religious fanatics in the Torah.
Right.
So because he sees a couple engaged in, we're all adults here, like in pagan sex. Sex is part of a pagan religious rite. A Jew and a Midianite, a Jew and a non-Jew, and he takes a spear and he in a real athletic feat, which I have a sneaking admiration for. Because it's my namesake. He manages to kill them both with one, and then institutes a massacre. And the massacre is it's in many places in the Torah praised. It's that very thing, that massacre, which halts God's wrath. Right. So the text here says Mattathias was like Pinchas, and the comparison there is complementary. The writer of this is heralding Pinchas's act and heralding
His action.
Mattathias' action too. All right, so the other, and here, so that's direct. He's like Pinchas, and that's a good thing to be like Pinchas. So the other issue, though, is that the quote, everyone who was faithful to God's covenant. This is Mattathias speaking. So here it's a direct quote. You don't see it in English. But in the Hebrew, it's a direct quote from Moses. And the quote is, Mi ladonai elai. It has more of a ring to it in Hebrew. Mi ladonai elai. Although it's the Adonai, of course, is Yud He Vav He. So whoever is for God, come with me. And it's kind of a, you're for us or against us sort of sense. Okay? So that is something that Moses said in the wake of the golden calf, right before Moses urges a massacre for the Levites to massacre everybody that was involved. So again, an instance of a religiously fueled massacre. So we're going to quickly read through the Pinchas passage, the Moses passage, just to give you a sense of what Hanukkah could have been about. What's interesting, it's not about this. Like we're not celebrating religious fanaticism in Hanukkah at all. We're not telling our kids jihad, we're not. So we're not doing that. We could have, because it's there in the sources, right? It's there in the sources.
Right.
There is a decision. I'm giving away the punchline, but you can see there's a decision in the Talmud not to glorify that element of the story, but to pick a completely different element of the story. So bear with me. There'll be time for questions. All right. Then this is the Moses story. Then Moses stood in the gate of the camp and said, "Who is on the Lord's side? Let him come to me." You'll have to take my word for it that in Hebrew it's the same. Mi ladonai elai. So the writer of the Maccabees is comparing Mattathias to Moses there. Moses who's about to commit a massacre. Thus, and all the Levites gathered themselves together to him, and he said to them, "Thus said the Lord God of Israel, put every man to his sword by his side, go in and out from the gate to gate throughout the camp, slay every man his brother." Again, civil war. Kill the Jews here. Kill our brothers, right? And every man his companion and every man his neighbor. Okay, which often happens in religious wars, right? Religiously fueled massacres. It's not just the enemies; they become cannibalistic, right? I mean, they end up.
You can see that today.
You can see it today. There's a whole lot that you can see today. Let me get to the end before we get to there, though. Okay, so and now we have the story of Pinchas, real quickly. And Moses said to the judges of Israel, "Slay you every one of his men who were attached to Baal Pur." And behold, one of the people of Israel came and brought to his brothers a Midianite woman in the sight of Moses, and in the sight of all the congregation of the people of Israel, who were weeping before the door of the tent of meeting. That's the Torah's very delicate way of saying they were having sex there as part of a pagan ritual. When Pinchas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, the priest, saw it, he rose up from among the congregation, took a javelin in his hand, and he went after the man of Israel into the tent and thrust both of them through, the man of Israel and the woman through her belly. So the plague ceased from the people of Israel. The fact that the plague ceases means that God approves of this act of murder, like religiously motivated murder. And those who died in the plague were 24,000. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Pinchas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest," who, by the way, already in the book of Maccabees, Mattathias is compared favorably to him, so he's like him. For the people of Israel, he was jealous for my sake. You have the word kana. He was a fanatic for my sake. That's a compliment there. Right. It's not an insult in any way. And Mattathias' behavior is the book of Maccabees approves of it. There's some sense that the Torah approves of Pinchas' behavior, a clear sense right here. And then Moses' behavior too in the golden calf seems to be the thing that restores the equilibrium. So we've got several passages, Jewish texts, that support religious fanaticism. And without going too deeply into this, we sort of get it. We do. Moses is still a hero for us, and there are times when it's required. And here's a balance that religions have to pay attention to. You need to have commitment, right? You need to have flair and passion and fire, but the fire can burn out of control. So here we have some examples of a fire, the fire leading to what we today I think would all call murder, religiously motivated murder, some of it even massacres. And it's in the book of Maccabees. And it's there. It's clear. It's Mattathias, who is the leader of the rebellion, exhibits that. So, all right. So now the question is, what does the Jewish tradition do with it? Because that's a very important question. Absolutely. The reason it's an important question is really current events. I mean, every religious culture has to decide, what do we do with our fanatics? Do we lift them up? Do we identify with them? Do they become really representatives of the religion as a whole? Or do we recognize the problem of fanaticism that exists in all religions and come up with stories and themes and systems that can balance it? It's not an easy challenge. So I can say, even though this is on it's on the video, and our 12 followers will see it. I like to say it's an elite group. But this is the issue of Islam. I'm not a politician, so I don't have to worry about whether it's the politically correct thing to say or not. This is the issue with Islam. Islam has a problem with fanaticism, and it's a problem that afflicts all of Islam because I don't care what the percentage is, 1%, 10%, 20%. It's certainly there.
Yeah.
It's there. It's there in sufficient quality that in quantity that it's our problem too. It's our problem too because we can be victims of it. And it's been a problem for other religious traditions. I mean, it was a problem in the Crusades. I mean, fortunately, we don't live in the Crusades. It's been a problem in Christianity. It hasn't been a very big problem in Judaism, and it hasn't. I try not to say this as a chauvinist and to be overly proud of Judaism, but you have very few religiously inspired massacres in Judaism, and I'm going to contend, and again I often say in this class, it's sort of half-baked and I'm thinking it through, that part of it is because Judaism made a conscious decision with the rabbis and the Talmud to turn away from this stuff, where we could have lifted up this religious fanaticism, this massacre mentality, and instead look to other values, and I don't think that's an accident. We have elements of it occasionally. It's the 20th anniversary of the assassination of the Prime Minister Rabbi.
1948.
And that was an act of religiously inspired murder. Right. 1948 you had massacres. I'm not sure those were religious.
Civil War in 1948.
I'm not sure those were religiously inspired. I mean, that's a different. I don't know if people were looking to Mattathias and Pinchas and say, although those things are in the text. So look, it's a low burning flame in Judaism, and because also, like I said, it's a tricky issue. You need commitment. You need people that are passionate. Otherwise, you get nowhere. But I think Judaism's been fairly successful, relatively successful. Yeah, and transcending it. So let's keep reading. So I'll just show you a few passages, then we'll be done. This is number 5. This is from the Talmud. Rav Chisda said, if the zealot comes like Pinchas. So now, here the rabbis spent some time in the Midrash, in the Talmud, examining the character Pinchas and what they think of him. And as it turns out, even though the Torah upholds Pinchas, more than upholds, in some ways they make Pinchas a hero. The Talmud does not. And that's important to keep in mind, that the Talmud has misgivings about Pinchas in several places, and I only put for you before you hear one. If the zealot comes like Pinchas, we do not instruct him to do so. So if someone comes saying, I'm going to be like Pinchas, we tell him no. We tell him, put down that spear. There may be a better way of dealing with this. It has been stated likewise. Rabbi Bar Chana said in Rabbi Yochanan's name, if he comes to take counsel, we do not instruct him to do so. So if Pinchas comes to us and say, hey, should I kill those two people? We tell him no. And we're the authorities. We meaning the rabbis, the structure, right? We tell him no. What is more, had Zimri forsaken his mistress and Pinchas slain him, Pinchas would have been executed on his account. So Pinchas in his actions actually was risking criminal behavior. They're saying that too. And had Zimri turned upon Pinchas and slain him, he would not have been executed since Pinchas was a pursuer seeking to take his life. So the same Zimri, the guy who killed, had every right to grab that spear and kill Pinchas because Pinchas was trying to kill him. So they're analyzing the story. This is actually quite audacious on the part of the rabbis because the Torah is complimenting Pinchas, but they're saying, well, we would have told him not to do it. And we would have said, no, that's not the best way to approach this. And by the way, Zimri could have easily defended himself and he would have been justified. There's another story that I don't have here, which I think is very interesting. It would take too long to unpack. But in the Midrash, the rabbis actually track Pinchas's career later in life in the land of Israel. Pinchas was young enough to enter the land of Israel. So he wasn't among those that died away in that generation. He was in the younger generation. So he entered the land of Israel and became high priest. And the rabbis trace his career, obviously imaginatively. We don't really know, but in the Midrash. So the Midrash portrays him as corrupt later in life. Corrupt and cynical and arrogant. And they have the story of a dispute between him and Yiftach. Yiftach was this guy that sacrificed his daughters. It was an awful story. And Pinchas could have stopped it. And the reason Pinchas didn't stop it was because he was corrupt. He was waiting for a bribe. And also he was arrogant. He was waiting for Yiftach to beg him to do it. And the rabbis just kind of invent this whole story. And part of it is that they want to show this is what happens to fanatics in old age. That they become corrupt, they become cynical, they become arrogant, and that's the journey, that's the career path of Pinchas. So the rabbis clearly are doing whatever they can to disapprove of Pinchas. They can't go full out and say Pinchas was a villain, because the Torah compliments Pinchas. But they're saying, look, this Pinchas had other options, and we the rabbis would not have approved his behavior. All right, one more, and then we'll have some time for questions. And this is not a Hanukkah or a Pinchas passage, but to me it's an important passage which shows the evolution of Judaism and the journey of the rabbis from this fanaticism to really what's important, which I think what's important to the rabbis here is the rule of law. The rule of law as it's mediated and discussed through hundreds of years in the discussions of the Talmud, which ends up moderating the fanatical impulses. Okay. This is 6. We won't do number 7. We won't have time. Rabbi Shimon ben Shefa said, "May I not see the consolation of Zion? If I did not see a man running after his neighbor into a ruin, and I ran after him, and found him with a sword in his hand, with his blood dripping, and the victim writhing in agony." All right. Does everybody understand what happened? I mean, he's running after some guys. He wants to stop him. And we got a killer, a murderer. And this is a famous story. Running after a victim. Rabbi Shimon so there's 3 people running. They duck into a ruin. And they get into the ruin. And Shimon ben Shetach says he sees the killer with the blood dripping from his sword. And the victim is dead. But he can't do anything. You'll see. I said to him, "Wicked one, who killed this man, I or you?" And that's rhetorical. Obviously you killed him. But what can I do since your blood is not given into my hand? I can't kill you now. I can't even arrest you because I don't have any eyewitnesses. The scripture says, at the mouth of 1 or 2 witnesses shall he that is to die be put to death. But the omnipresent shall exact retribution from you. It is said they had not yet moved from there when a serpent bit him and he died. So this is kind of deus ex machina. The serpent comes in and kills the killer. But the point is that Shimon says, I have to follow the law. Whereas my religious impulse of passion maybe would dictate that I take the sword and I kill you because you're clearly the one that killed him. But we have the Torah, and the Torah gives us law, gives us rules and principles. And those are the things that are necessary to moderate and mediate our religious passion. And that, in the end, that's what wins out at the end of the day in Judaism. And I guess that's my point. That's how Judaism becomes what it is today. We should hold on to that too. It's something we should be proud of, and also every religious tradition has to be cautious. And I'll say with a sense of pride, Hanukkah then does not become the holiday of religious fanatics. It becomes the holiday of light, and it's not an accident.
No.
That it's a choice, a religious choice, a cultural choice that the rabbis made.
That's reflected in the Haftorah that you do on Shabbos.
That's right, yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
not by sword,
Yeah.
but by knife.
So, Ron.
Is it possible that the zealots against Rome, 250 years later,
Yeah.
were inspired by the Maccabean story?
Probably they were, yeah. I think, and that goes back to your question earlier too, that there were political issues. There were stories of issues between the rabbis and the Hasmoneans, and the Hasmoneans are portrayed as kind of brutes all through the Talmud. Brute force and physical force, and also, they became, the story of that the rabbis portray of Pinchas in the Midrash seems to echo what the rabbis thought of the Maccabees, as they were brutes and they became corrupt and cynical, and arrogant. So that these former zealots that, their zealotry somehow curdled and spoiled, and that's what they think happened to the Hasmoneans, and that's how they portray happening to Pinchas. But I will also say that yes, I think that the rebels against Rome were inspired by the Maccabees, but I'll say there's a nuanced point here too. It's not so simple. We were also inspired by the Maccabees. I mean, the Maccabean rebellion inspires the Jews in 1948. So you need a little bit of fanaticism. Yeah, exactly. And you need to defend yourself. If you can't, not everything was responsive to the rule of law. So you've got to have some of that fire. And so it takes a wise tradition to find the balance. And the Talmud is trying to find the wisdom in the tradition, because this kind of unbridled massacre that doesn't help anywhere. And then you could look at ISIS and or the Crusades, and you can just see that's what happens. The fire can burn out of control, and you've got this just nihilistic violence, and that just supports itself until it burns out. So Ron's been waiting.
So, and then Rabbi.
Yeah, sure.
So a couple of things. First, I think what's unique about Hanukkah is the miracle of the oil, because I think there's a lot of examples of fanaticism in the Iranian enough. So that's not unique. I don't think. I did look up on Wikipedia. It says it reminds us Judah was a Kohen, so presumably they were Levites.
Yeah.
And the last thing I think.
They were Levites, of course. Yeah.
Right. And the last thing is Pinchas. When he acted zealously. Yeah. He was not premeditated. So I don't think it's contradictory. So if he came and said, "Should I do this?" I'd say no. But that doesn't mean what he did was wrong, because he didn't premeditate it.
Yeah. Well, that's the nuance. I mean, I'll let. That's true. It's good. It's a good point. It shows that they were limited in the way that they could criticize Pinchas. Once the Torah lifts him up, then what are the rabbis going to do? So so they do it in subtle ways. So they say, we would not have taught that, which is a way of saying you guys shouldn't do it. Don't do this at home. This is a nice story. You can read the story, but this is certainly not what we're planning. This is not what we should do. And then they take upon themselves the luxury of portraying him later in life as being kind of a jerk. So then the reader can extrapolate.
So Rabbi, if you look at in recent times, if you say this is the way we've evolved as a Jewish people, you look at the occupation of Lebanon in the late 80s and the 90s and those infamous massacres in Shatia and the camps. Right. So to what extent do the rabbis influence in Israel today? Because they had a great influence on what was happening here. Yeah. The political establishment, I mean, do they restrain them? Is there...
I think they have a big influence.
I know they close supermarkets on a Shabbat. Yeah, they have a great influence there. But what do they do when it comes to this other stuff?
I don't know enough to answer that. My sense is they have a great influence, especially because there's more and more religious soldiers who are trained in yeshivas, so they're going to have more and more. And their challenge, I mean, the challenge in Israel is to take this stuff seriously also, to understand that Judaism or the Talmud transcends religious fanaticism, and to be teaching religious fanaticism, which sadly I think is done in many yeshivas in Israel, it has its own dangers. It has its own dangers, and in some ways it's also counter to 2,000 years of Jewish wisdom tradition. So it's a concern.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I'm reading this book, and, we're calling them zealous and all that, but everybody around them, I mean, the Jews were so enamored of everything Greek. They were all becoming Hellenists. Right. So these were people who were trying to say, who were afraid that Judaism was going to get wiped out. And so, that feeling, which is what a lot of groups have, but they want to maintain the traditions when everything around them is... being assimilating. We have the same thing today. And so they have in Islam too. These fanatics are thinking like, they're really religion.
When you feel threatened too. So the issue is really there's one issue here, I guess, that I'm focusing on, and that's religious violence. There's the zealotry that leads to massacres. And that's what religions have to be careful about. I mean, everybody wants passion and commitment, and it's interesting. I once had an interesting conversation with an Israeli rabbi about these things, and we were both agreeing with each other. This is absolutely, religious passion and murder is wrong. We can all agree murder is wrong. But I finally said, you know what? Honestly, this may be your problem in Israel. My problem in America is not that my congregation is going around and committing religious murders. It's not an issue for me. I don't think any of you like that. I don't have to give sermons reminding everybody, hey, like no massacres this week. If you can yourself, if you can just give yourself a week. Whereas in Israel, there's the danger, at least, of too much passion. In America, our problem is not enough passion. But to me, what's interesting here is that Judaism as a whole makes this decision not to lift up murder. Like we're going to draw the line at religious violence. That's the danger.
Yeah. You're talking about the evolution of Judaism. What comes to my mind is that when it comes to the rituals, we see a nation that is involved in sacrifice, and then it changes into tefillah. So that's a huge.
It's interesting. That's an interesting point. Interesting point. Yeah. Right. You have the blood, and then you remove the blood from the whole spiritual equation. It's really interesting. It's very interesting too, because there's the blood remains in circumcision. Circumcision, there's vestige of it. It's a vestige. Yeah, it is vestige. It's vestigial in the sense that there's just a tiny bit of blood in a bris. But the word appears over and over again in the liturgy. of a Brit Milah, this blood, and it's blood that so it's a vestige of when we needed blood to approach God. So now we just have like this symbolic amount, and you're right. It's a very interesting, and I can say we're among friends and our 12 followers that it's a huge issue with Islam. Something like the idea that blood sanctifies, that blood cleanses, that blood. I mean, God, it's madness. But it's a madness that has its origin in religious teachings.
Right.
So that's why it's in some ways even more dangerous. Yeah.
I'm just curious about these two different mindsets. What was the milieu at the time that the original, that the Talmud, that the Torah writings were done, assuming that there were a number of texts that were brought together by some editor. What was the environment that caused praise for this action at that time?
Yeah, well, so the Torah text, a simple answer, which isn't a very good answer, but a simple answer is that, so the Torah is, I think for most scholars, obviously there's disagreements about dating for these texts, but the Torah here is a product of Jewish independence in the land of Israel, where they may have been a little bit more tough and feeling like they needed an army and their enemies around, and it was more of a military culture. So they were upholding Pinchas's actions, whereas the Talmud is already in Babylonia in exile, and there was more, and so the Talmud comes after two unsuccessful rebellions, which were catastrophes. So they were so I think that's probably, and I'm not an historian, but the historical evolution is that the rabbis were seeing that, look, this violence, organized military violence, got us nowhere. So now we have to come up with other strategies. So the Talmud has this strategy of we're getting the rule of law and internalized passion and not taking up arms against each other or against the outsider. Whereas during days of independence, during the Torah, the military was more upheld. Yeah.
And I wanted to say, thinking about the story of Yiftach, it's against extremism, because Yiftach had made a vow. So Pinchas, if he would, as an extremist might say, well, you made the vow, you do have to follow your promise of the vow. Yeah. Whereas the rabbis of the Talmud, it's more moderation in all things. Yeah, we're not for this extreme or that extreme. Right. Be patient, be moderate, take in the whole context of a situation. Right,
that's right. That's why you have the Talmud. I mean, this is a Talmud class, right? So it's
Right, and the other thing I wanted to say is we haven't erased the Maccabees from Hanukkah at all.
No, right.
But what we emphasize about the Maccabees is something different than massacre.
I know, it's amazing. They're like cute little toy soldiers.
There are lots of ways that we still remember the Maccabees. Right. But not it's not their extremism that we emphasize at all in our story.
Yeah, right. That's right. That's totally true. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. Very interesting.
When can you get this online, Rabbi?